Hello and welcome to the small group edition of my book, The Life You've Always Wanted. I'll be hosting the video segments you watch throughout the study. Each session will have a brief intro video to help set up the theme of the study. This will lead to some initial discussion questions found in your participants' guides under the heading, Questions to Think About. You will then view a longer video teaching segment, usually lasting 12 to 15 minutes, that will go deeper into that session's topic. Following this, you'll be directed back into your participants' guides for Bible study and further group discussion. And then to close our time together, I'll offer a final thought to end the session. I believe the study you are about to enter into over the next 6 sessions can have significant impact on your life. I think an added benefit you have is being able to do this study in a small group setting. Small groups offer a unique opportunity over individual study or larger group studies. You're surrounded by people who can support you, pray for you, hold you accountable, so that what we talk about over the next 6 sessions becomes a shared experience. And I hope you do that for each other. Spiritual transformation is so much more attainable in the context of a community of believers. And I trust you'll take advantage of all the things a small group can offer as we start on this journey together. I think if there's one word that sums up the hunger of the human heart, it's the word life. We all have hopes about living certain kind of lives, being a certain kind of person. And that means that all of us face disappointments. I get disappointed about not being the father that I've always wanted to be, or not being the kind of friend I most admire, or still loving sin too much and God too little. And that brings us to the great hope that Jesus brought the human race. Because the hope of the gospel is not just that you get into heaven after you die. Jesus said, I've come that you might have life, have it here and now, and have it with abundance. And that's what I'd like to explore together with you. I'd like to invite you to go with me on a journey to discover the life you've always wanted. Hey, good morning. I'm John. Nice to see you. Come on over. Morning, how you doing? Good. If you guys would all kind of gather around here, we're going to spend some time together and we're going to talk about spiritual growth, spiritual development, how that takes place. We're going to do it in kind of a unique setting, and I want to tell you a little bit about that. We're at a nature center that has a training course, and all throughout there's going to be stations that are kind of exercise stations. And here's part of what we're going to talk about. Your body is constantly being formed and shaped. For better or for worse, like it or not, it's in process. Your physical body is being shaped one way or another. In a similar way, your spirit is always being formed. Your inner life. Folks sometimes talk about spiritual formation. And the meaning behind that phrase is simply the fact that what is inside of you is always in the process of being shaped for better or for worse. By the things that you read, by the conversations that you have, by the prayers that you pray or you don't pray. And there are things that you can do to open yourselves up to God being at work to form your spirit, your inner life, in ways that are strong and healthy and good. And we're going to learn about that together for a while. And you have some things to help you out. They're in these backpacks right here. So if you would, pick up a backpack, don't look inside it yet, and let's get ready to go. Y'all ready? Yeah. All right, let's go. All right, if I can have you all come over here. Jennifer, there's an object in your backpack. Ellen, I'm going to ask if you would pull it out right now. That's going to give us all a glimpse into how it is that the gospel works. Now, if you want to take a look, that's a very handsome frog. And you should all know that he was taken quite carefully and will be returned to his habitat so that no animals will be damaged during the filming of this project. An author by the name of J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote Lord of the Rings, talks about how one of the dynamics in fairy tales that makes us love them is they are all stories of transformation. And a frog in a fairy tale, when kissed by a princess, will always turn into a prince. And Ellen, I'm going to ask you to do that right now. No, you don't have to. But what we're going to be talking about is how do we open ourselves up to this transforming power of God in our lives. Tolkien says that the gospel is kind of like a fairy tale with this one enormous difference, that it's all true. And that we really can be, with God's help, in the process of being transformed. Now, there's a great word that the Apostle Paul uses to describe this. I don't know if any of you saw it. There used to be, may still be, a television show called the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. My son used to love that show. And it featured these kids who were ordinary human beings, but they would receive power to do extraordinary things. And their rallying cry was, "It's morphing time." Well, the Apostle Paul actually used a word, or variations of it. The Greek word is morphao. And it had to do with something being transformed. So, for instance, Paul writes to the church at Galatia and he says, "My dear brothers and sisters, I'm in the pains of childbirth until Christ should be formed in you." And he uses a version of that word morph. Or when he writes to the church at Rome, he says, "Don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds." In other words, Paul is saying, it's morphing time. I once tried to introduce that liturgy to a church where I would come out and say to everybody, "Let us morph," and they were supposed to respond, "We shall morph indeed." But it never really caught on. But that really is what the Apostle Paul is saying. It's morphing time. And there's an interesting bit of grammar to this process of morphing or transformation. Can you all put up with grammar for just a moment? Often when Paul talks about it, like in Romans 12, he will say, "Be transformed." And he uses the passive voice. He never says transform yourself, because you can't transform yourself. So there's a sense in which it's something that must happen to us. But he also uses the imperative. It is a command. There is something that we're supposed to do. So this process of transformation is the deepest longing of your heart. You can't do it yourself. You must be transformed. It comes whenever it comes as a gift from God. But there are things that you can do and I can do to open ourselves up for it, that we do to give God space to transform us, because we are on the way from frog life to becoming the sons and daughters of God. So let's find out more about that. Let's go. All right, everybody, come on over here and join me. Now we're here because we're going to talk about the transformation, not of our bodies, but of our spirits, of our souls, of our lives. And it does involve certain kinds of activities which will put us in touch with objects like this one. But before we get to how it is that transformation happens, I want to say a bit about what happens to people when they're not being authentically transformed, when they're not morphing, when they're not becoming genuinely more loving or joyful. Because I think a great danger takes place. Some people in churches just kind of give up on ever changing. And they think, well, I'll just tread water till I get to heaven. And they kind of secretly resign themselves to never growing spiritually. But a lot of people, if they're not authentically becoming more loving and more joyful and more winsome, they will experience what might be called pseudo-transformation. They will try to find some ways to make themselves look different than people who are outside their group. Well, to get at that, Dunn talked about what sociologists call boundary markers or identity markers. The idea is this: All human beings tend to be exclusive. We want to know who's in my group and who's not in my group. You kind of have an opportunity to do that because some of you are red backpack people and some of you are blue backpack people. So those could become kind of a boundary marker. Boundary marker is any style of dress or behavior or language or vocabulary that is highly visible and relatively superficial that serves to separate who's in my group from who's outside my group. For instance, if you were driving in San Francisco in the 1960s and somebody pulled up next to you in a car, they were driving a Volkswagen van. They had long stringy hair, granny glasses, they were barefoot, love beads, had Make Peace Not War stickers plastered all over the van. You would know you were driving next to a hippie. Next to a hippie because they had the boundary markers. All groups tend to have them. Bikers have them. What's a biker's favorite color? Black. Biker's favorite form of skin ornamentation? Tattoo. Biker's favorite kind of woman? No one? Bueller? No. Biker chick. A biker chick. That's exactly right. Okay. All groups tend to have these boundary markers to let us know who's in my group and who's out. Now, back to the first century. Why did they spend so much time writing about dietary laws, Sabbath keeping, or circumcision? Well, Dunn says, because those were the boundary markers. Not bad practices in themselves, but they became the highly visible, relatively superficial way to determine, are you in the people of God or are you outside? If someone is not experiencing authentic transformation, their faith will generally deteriorate into the search for pseudo-transformation. Now, Jesus says that part of the gospel message is it is possible for you to experience authentic transformation, so you don't have to do goofy legalistic things to make yourself feel different from people on the outside. Maybe the most fundamental distinction we're going to talk about when we're together is absolutely crucial for spiritual growth. And it is this: there is an enormous difference between training to do something versus trying to do something. Paul says in a letter to the church at Corinth, all athletes who are going to compete in games, they enter into strict training. He says they do it to win a wreath that will perish. We do it, that is, we enter into strict training to win a wreath that will never perish. What does it mean to train? To train means that you arrange your life around those activities that will enable you to do what you cannot now do by direct effort. So for instance, if you'd like your body to look like a very powerful person, you might come to something like this. And on a regular basis, you would do these. You would start maybe by only doing one. But eventually, if you kept at it faithfully, you'd be able to do quite a few of them. And then your body would look like what it does not look like right now. Over time, it would morph. It would be transformed. This distinction between training to do something versus trying to do something is fundamental when it comes to human transformation. That's true physically. That's true about other achievements, like musically, if you want to learn how to play the piano. It's true about intellectual life. Most of us in this group couldn't go out and run every step of a marathon right now if we tried really hard. But if we trained, eventually we could. Well, the same idea is true when it comes to spiritual life. And we'll talk a little later on about certain kind of training exercises to help us defeat hurry and grow patience in our lives. But I want to make a fundamental point about this whole idea of spiritual disciplines. Spiritual disciplines, which are central to training for spiritual life, are not things that I do to try to earn brownie points with God. They're not things that I do to show how spiritual I am. They're not things I do for their own sake. I don't try to become a master of fasting or solitude. They are a means to an end. And the end to which they are a means is life. It's just life. It is to be able to live a kingdom kind of life, so that you find yourself doing the right thing at the right time, in the right way, for the right reason. And so we arrange our lives around a kind of training to be like Jesus, so that we can live the way that Jesus would live if he was right in our place, in our bodies. And the opportunity to do that, to train in that way, and to live that kind of life, that's the greatest opportunity that you will ever have. So, it's time for us to start training. Let's morph. Well, I really hope you enjoyed our first session together. The personal journey sections in your participants' guides at the end of each study have questions that you can reflect on either now or later at home. And I would encourage you to set aside some quiet time to think about these questions. They don't have right or wrong answers, and nobody else needs to know your responses unless you choose to discuss them with someone. What's important is that you take time to reflect on some issues that we've explored today. To close, I'd just like to remind you that spiritual transformation is not a matter of trying harder, but of training wisely. Trying can only take us so far. If we're serious about spiritual transformation, we must train for it, just as we must train for running a marathon or being a concert pianist. Training involves practicing spiritual disciplines, which can be any activity that opens us up to God's transforming power and helps us live life as Jesus taught and modeled it. These practices help us grow in the ability to do what we cannot do by willpower alone. So, it's morphing time. Time for me to learn from God how to live life as Jesus taught and modeled it.